I'm going to go ahead and unmute and try to go ahead and get started on this. Um, Hello, my name is Dee. I'm the founder and um, CEO and all that stuff for Unplug Grief Ministries and Podcast. I also have a ministry where I also help others with their grief life, a coach, and we are doing our weekly podcast. And today we are so fortunate to have Tracy come aboard with us. And it's the interesting thing that we have of people coming in um, to talk, to share. It really benefits a lot for us, and I'm giving it a minute, one more minute, and then we're gonna really get started on it. Tracy is a coach, but she also shares really important, viable lessons that we all, even if we all have something in common, the grief, right? So the grief is what draws us together and support each other. But the grief also teaches all of us different lessons of life and even helps and works with mental health. So Tracy has this wonderful gift and talent and skill that is going to help us to better understand what grief taught her and what she can do to help you. So, Tracy, we have all the time now that we're on StreamYard and live, so we're not stuck with the Zoom 40 minutes or less.
That's
And
always
for
fun.
some reason, I was willing to pay this because I got more of an audience here than I would on Zoom. But Tracy, I want you to be able to, introduce yourself, um, share a little bit of your story. But I want also this season, I've been trying to get everybody to teach us something. Share something that you learned through your experience that may help others to become to find that joy, to find that healing. You know, I always say I still grieve for my son, and days I still cry, but I also know how to find my joy. I'm also aware of what my surroundings are now and have to embrace my grief. Doesn't mean I don't grieve for my son, I still do, but I just do it in a new way. So share with us or teach us something that has taught you that you feel that can help others with their grief.
Sure. And thank you for the kind words in that introduction. I appreciate that. Yeah, grief looks different for everyone, obviously. And grief will look different or over the course of time. So, like you were saying, the grief that you have for your son is different now than it was initially. And so the same thing is true for me and my grief. I lost my daughter to suicide a little over 16 years ago. So it'll be 17 years in December. And so when I look back from, how I was then to how I am now, obviously as a mom, I was totally devastated. I was, functional enough to get out of bed and go to work. And that was only because, I had to pay the bills. So on one hand, that was an outlet for me. I didn't have to sit all day and think, and ruminate about what had happened. But, it was probably too soon really to try to be functional and pretend like I was functioning normally. So, initially it was just devastating and getting through day by day. And then over time, I started, what helped me a lot was peer support. So finding support groups of other loss survivors to suicide was really helpful for me because I could sit and I could listen to them and I could hear the same stories that they were going through resonate with my own life. So that was tremendous. And so then I started, participating in survivor walks and prevention walks. And that helped because then I was meeting more people again, right? And then, a time came where I started getting frustrated with the lack of support for suicide loss survivors. And I wanted to basically educate people about the stigma that we have to function within. And I wanted to share with the world that, we're sitting alone and we don't get the support that we need all the time because it's suicide and nobody wants to talk about suicide. But the reality is, we're grieving. We have guilt in there of whether or not it was our fault, and we need help. So, now at this point in time, I have my own company. I support loss survivors. Like you said, I do coaching. I sit on the board of directors for a national organization for suicide prevention. So I can use my voice to help there, to get my voice out to more avenues. But what I tell new loss survivors, because I do participate in our local peer support group. I tell local loss survivors, share your story. Don't be afraid to share your story, because there might be somebody else out there that, number one, needs to know your story because it's going to help them. And sharing your story will make you feel better. It doesn't seem like it at the time. It surely doesn't, seem like it when it's a new loss. But sharing your story and getting that grief out, helps alleviate health issues that might come up. When we hold grief and stress internally, that's a heavy hit on our system. And 6 months after I lost my daughter, I ended up with a hiatal hernia that still, I struggle with to this day. But my body took that grief and stored it, and I didn't function well. So yeah, like I said, that's what I tell people is get that story out. Even if it's through tears, even if it's through improper language, whatever you need to do, get that stress out of your body.
I had muted myself because I tried not to jump in and speak because I want to hear, I want to listen. I'm trying to listen because even, and I've said this before with many other people, even though I'm a coach, life is a school and you still learn things every day with different people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important that even if I'm a coach, grief coach, life coach, mental health coach, I'm still learning a lot of stuff. Not just because with clients, but I'm just learning a lot of stuff. There's still a lot of things out there that we as coaches still keep our skills up to better ourselves first, and then to help others.
Well, educating ourselves, it's so important because there's a lot of miscommunications, a lot of misnomers out there about suicide and why people die by suicide, et cetera. And so, I went back to school and decided to get my degree in psychology because I wanted to understand why we had such a struggle when my daughter was trying to get help for her mental health. And I don't think she was treated effectively. So I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what are therapists learning at the college level? How do we get to this point? And so I did that. And then I went back to school again and got my master's in psychology. And that particular master's program had an emphasis in life coaching. And so like you, I wanted to take coaching and I wanted to specialize it to the suicide loss survivor, sector. And so, because as we know, especially in the midst of COVID, everybody needs therapy. And so there's only so many therapists to go around. They only have so much time in their schedule. They may not have effective training for what, someone is going through. And so may not be effective that way. And so I thought, well, why can't we take life coaching and gear that towards loss survivors as another avenue that they can come in and talk about everything that's going on with them and see that, you can you'll never get over it. You'll never get past it, as you know, but
Yes.
you find ways to accommodate and accept it. In fact, I'm speaking next month at the National Suicidology Conference about a new concept that I came up with called the 4 phases of suicide loss. And so as we talk about the 5 to 7 stages of grief, which are all relevant, suicide loss survivors seem to have this added, I'm not sure what the right word would be, but this added component to the grief process because they're devastated and because, they're in a fog and they're trying to understand what happened and they're trying to take blame off of themselves or figure out how to take blame off of themselves and then try to figure out how they'll ever get to a point of accepting what happened. And so, I believe that for a suicide loss survivor, these phases of loss more effectively represent what a loss survivor is going through. And again, it's all learning. It's all, like you said, it's taking what we learn and then putting it into practice and learning how it can help the next client.
So when you went back to get your master's, so you also took a class on life coaching. Did you
Actually, I took, within that program, there were 5 or 6 classes on coaching.
Oh,
so
really?
A whole range of everything from ethics to business coaching to life coaching to grief coaching, anything having to do with coaching.
Did you take the grief coaching by any chance?
Yes.
Because one of the things that I noticed since Timothy passed, when I used to go to Compassion Friends, and one of the things that I kept hearing over and over from this one lady, she was the grandmother. No, I'm sorry, she was her son that passed away. That she can find a therapist, but she couldn't find a grief therapist. And I think that's where the lacking is, because there may be I went to therapy after Timothy died. And I too find this was great that I can get therapy, and it was helping me with my underlying issues, but it was not helping me with my grief. It was helping me with my past issues and not my right now current issue. And I felt like I was the one teaching them.
Well, I know I was the one teaching them about suicide loss because what I found in both my bachelor's and my master's program, we didn't talk about suicide. And you would think that that's where you would talk about suicide, would be in your psychology classes for these therapists that are going to be treating people. And so what I found is after you graduate with your master's and now you want to be a licensed clinician, you have to find the people that are teaching you about what suicide loss would look like. So there's a real, and I'm not criticizing the therapy community at all. They're all doing a great job, but we need to do better, at least in the colleges, of giving them more content related to that, because I hear so many loss survivors firsthand who will say, like you, I went to a therapist and they have no idea what to do with me because they've never been trained in suicide loss or suicide prevention or ideation or any of it. We need to get better, and I've talked to therapists who have said, well, on the rare occasions I might have someone with that situation, it's not, worth me having the training when I may not use it. And I argue the fact of, okay, but when you get that one person that comes in the door, they're traumatized already before they see you. They can't, you can't not have some knowledge on what's happening, because for the hundreds of thousands of people we lose every year to suicide, there's a lot of people who need grief therapy, just for the suicide aspect. I don't know how you lost your son. And I'm sorry to hear that you lost your son, but suicide is a real problem for loss survivors, because on average, for every person that dies by suicide, 135 people are affected in some way by that loss. It might be just an acquaintance, that died, or it might be a family member. So in some, aspect, people are affected and need the help to understand their loss and try to process the loss and try to have a healthy, life after the loss for the long term. Because if we do not help the people that are struggling with their grief from a suicide loss, the percentage of people who will then turn around and take their own lives is in the high 60% range. And that is, scary all in itself. And so what I, promote out there to the world is we spend so much time on prevention, which is certainly important. We want to save as many people as we can, but we also have to look at the post-vention or, after the loss segment as well. So we aren't losing those people too.
Oh, the other thing I've heard a lot about, because there's quite a few people that's here on the global grief networks who've had to deal with suicide, suicide of spouses, suicide of children. But I think there was one person that was supposed to do suicide loss of veterans as well, because I know the suicide rate on that is high because of the PTSD that they're dealing with,
Right.
And what I've heard that the vet hospitals are just not getting them in fast enough.
They're doing better over the last couple of years, I think, in recognizing that they need to treat for this and really evaluate the vets. But, as with any system, it's slow to take off and be effective sometimes. So, all we can do is just advocate where we're at to say, well, let's look at the vets who are dying from suicide. Let's look at the teenagers. Right now, the highest population for suicide death is the elderly, which we don't think about the elderly, in that context sometimes. But, you have elderly people with health challenges, maybe financial issues because they got to retirement and they didn't have enough money to sustain long term. And so, we have or they lose their spouses and now they're by themselves. It's an epidemic too. So, it's prevalent. It needs to be talked about more. And, I'm glad that you have this type of platform that we can do that.
Yeah. And I think we all need to be, whether you're a licensed psychologist or therapist or not, even if we're like a certified coach, I think we all need to just be much more aware of not just our clients, but our surroundings, because it could be anybody that even you may not know that might do something right in front of you,
Right.
So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. So there are a lot of times that there are people who are trying to commit suicide and the police officers trying to calm them down. Do you find that police officers are trained enough to calm somebody down to keep them from losing their lives?
I can't speak for all police officers, right? I mean, we're all different. We're all, different jurisdictions, maybe trained differently. So it's kind of hard to lump them all into one bucket, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I know we have different cities, counties that are implementing behavioral health groups that, if you call 911 because you have someone who's in a suicidal crisis, sometimes the behavioral health team will go out. Sometimes a behavioral health team will go out with the officer. I mean, it just all depends on the situation. If you have a situation where there's, a gun danger involved, you may have a police officer out there, for safety.
Yes.
But, it's something that we have to continue to work on. If you have a city where your first responders and your police officers are highly trained in suicide prevention and suicide postvention, mental health, situations, you're probably going to get a pretty good outcome from that. But again, it all comes down to legislative laws. What are they allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? What are they allowed to say? What are they not allowed to say? So, as with all different segments of our society, I think that are, there's work that needs to be done in the first responder field. More training, I guess, is, what I'm saying is more training, more effective training on how to understand what someone in a suicidal crisis, is potentially thinking or going through emotionally. So I hope that answers your question. I try not to,
I understand.
lump everybody in one thing, right? Because I think we tend to do that when we want to fix problems. We say, oh, all suicide loss survivors are this, or all, police officers need to do this way. Different cultures, different race, different, situations, different cities, different laws, they all come into play to make the situation, exist how it is at that time.
Yes.
So it's all about communication. It's all about learning from each other of what works, what doesn't work, what could work. And I think as a society, we don't communicate enough effectively.
So it's also more like effective communications, so that everybody has a good understanding of what's going on and how to be a help.
Implement, yeah. And and people may know what to do, but then you get the roadblocks of laws and rules, and and sometimes people have to be a big enough force to push through those barriers to be effective.
Now, you shared earlier that you are now on the board of the National Suicide.
I'm on the board of the American Association of Suicidology, which is the largest member-based organization for suicide prevention and work. I've been on the board. It's coming up on my first year. I'm on a 3-year term. And I aligned myself with this organization because, they're out there looking at the different segments of the population. We talk to researchers, and then we'll, also talk to loss survivors. We'll also talk to clinicians, and we'll talk to people with ideation. And we all come together and we all learn from each other as to, what's working, what's being effective out in our communities.
So it's like a lot of research that's being done.
Constant research is being done, and not even by, not even by this organization, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Their main focus is research and figuring out, why do people choose to die by suicide? Why, or what things work, to reduce the numbers of deaths.
Yeah. So one of my thinking, and I could be wrong, but to correct me if you need to, is that sometimes I feel like the reason why, especially teens, and as they get into their adulthood, is why they get into that depression mode and probably even feeling the need to suicide. It's probably something that happened to them in their childhood that caused that kind of pain, that they think the only way to get rid of that pain is to end their life or to be hooked on drugs or alcohol to numb the pain.
Yeah, I don't know that we can tie everything to a childhood experience. Because there's so much trauma in the world. You could have a person that has a great childhood, and then they have some kind of trauma later, in their teen years, and then that starts a cycle of issues. Personally, my own opinion is I think it comes down to some coping skills, some lack of coping skills. Maybe in school we're not teaching enough coping skill mechanisms at the right age groups. Because we find that the stressors that potentially lead up to a suicide, it's typically not one thing. It's a layer of things that, kind of stack on top of each other. And then it's finally that final thing that they just can't handle, and it comes toppling down for them. If they could figure out why suicides happen all the time, we wouldn't have any. So, we need to look at varying causes, that might happen. And there's always the biological component. how chemical brain makeup comes into play too, which, you'll hear me continue to say, we're not a one size fits all society. So yes, I think that, some things could be tied to childhood trauma, that may not be dealt with effectively or effectively for long term. I'll use the example of my daughter. My daughter had some abuse issues happen when she was 4. And we dealt with those. I had her in therapy. She went to therapy for probably 7 or 8 months. And the therapist that worked with her was great. And, she came out of that, functioning without issue. But I did get a warning that said when she gets older, as different life changes happen for her, that could trigger something in her subconscious. It could be anything from changing schools, moving from middle school to high school, her first boyfriend, all those major puberty life things, right? And sure enough, I think, she got to age 16, she moved up to the high school, and I think some of that started to unravel for her. And, I was dealing with a mental health system where I lived at the time that wasn't effective with treating her. I got a lot of pushback with clinicians saying, "Oh, teenagers, girls will be girls. They're just, she's making up stories so that she'll fit in with her peers." And no, we had a genuine issue going on. Unfortunately, in Washington State, where I am, children age 14 and over can dictate their own health care. So I was not allowed into some of those conversations she was having with her medical staff.
Oh, Lord.
And some of them would not listen to what I had to say to, interject. And so I'm of the opinion that it takes a village, right? You might know something about me that somebody else doesn't know, and that person might know something about me that you don't know. So why don't we all just get together, share the stories, find the commonalities, and then try to come up with a plan to fix those. But, unfortunately, I can't speak for everywhere, but in that particular case, the teachers weren't talking to the medical staff, and, she didn't have to talk to me, and they didn't have to talk to me. So it was just a perfect storm that ended up coming up.
So do you feel like the educators, the teachers also need more training in this as well?
Definitely. Yeah.
So it also sounds like, just from hearing you, that even her therapist was not effective at all.
No, because my daughter went in with a story about her life that wasn't true. And she was going off on this tangent of all these things that were happening to her that weren't. And the therapist was going off of that. So there wasn't any way to ever really treat her for what might have chemically, biologically, past trauma, any of that. And then between the time that we started therapy, it was 4 months when she took her own life. So there wasn't really enough time even to delve into the underlying factors that might be going on. And in that course of time, she had attempted also. And so that's what had, started me on that trajectory to get her, therapy to begin with. Because, as soon as she attempted to take her life, I was like, oh, I gotta call all the mental health professionals, and we need to fix this now because this is a problem. And it was really ugly. And then, as a single mom, I was doing it by myself, and that's a whole different animal as far as not having support for me. So, through that, to get back to your original question at the beginning of the hour, I learned that, we have to not be afraid to ask for help, even if it sounds like it's something we should know. We should know how to parent a child this way. We should know how we should feel in a certain situation. We may not, and that's okay. It is okay
Yeah.
to say, my child is doing this and I don't know what to do. And that doesn't make me a bad parent because I didn't know what to do. This is just something nobody ever trained us on as
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah. Wow. So I mean, this has always been on my mind. So I see there's a need of the education and helping teachers. I hate to say this, even doctors and nurses, because I think they become so immune to death that they don't know how to feel anymore. If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense.
Because I remember when Tim was in the hospital, because he was on a ventilator, so he was in the hospital a lot. And I remember the one doctor who kept saying, when you get sick the next time, just stay home and die. Don't come back here because we're not going to do anything for you. And I remember blowing up.
Good.
Blowing up. I don't care if we were in ICU or not. But you don't come in and tell, this is how immune he was, that he did not want to deal with people who were sick, but yet he was the director of the ICU of people who come in sick. So why would you tell a 21, 22-year-old not to come back in if he gets sick?
Right.
That your job as a doctor is supposed to be a healer. You're supposed to help.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to tell him just go home and die. Because number one, that's not your job or even his job to die. That's God's job. And when God's ready for him to pass away, that time will come. But meanwhile, he's still alive. Timothy lived 3 more years after that. But Timothy's pulmonologist was right there in the nursing station. And I remember seeing Dr. Lascano's face. He was like, he couldn't believe what he was hearing, and and the sad part about it, this was the exact same doctor who was on call when Timothy died 3 years later. So I feel even if you're so immune to what's going on in ICU or regular floors or whatever, I feel like I don't think they know how to express their feelings anymore. It's like they're so numb to it. And it's like you need to have someplace to let it out.
Yeah.
Even if you have to go in some your big field and scream, you need a place and the time to get it out and have your emotions and share your emotions. Show your emotions, because that's something God created for us. That's a gift he gave us so that we can have those feelings. He has it. Yeah. That's why he gave it to us,
Exactly.
But I think doctors and nurses are just so immune to it. I was just shocked.
I think you have that. I think there's, like you said, there's some lack of training in there for the specific issues. There's a lot of one size fits all mentality that, you lump a whole bunch of children together. They're all going to behave this way or not behave this way. Even with my daughter, she had what I would have called a mental break about 3 weeks before she actually took her life. And I took her to the emergency room. And we talked to the social workers, and she was in there for probably about 6 hours in the emergency room. And initially they thought that she must have been on some kind of drugs. So they did a drug test and she wasn't. And so then social work talked to her, and, she was having like this mental episode right in front of them. 1 minute she's happy, then she's crying, then, all this. And I said, as her mother, I said, I'm not leaving with her until somebody fixes her, because this has been going on now for about 4 months. And the social worker said to my daughter, we have a place here in the hospital for people that are stressed out and have some issues and want to talk to somebody. Does that sound like some place you would like to stay at and clear? And she was all for it. She said, yeah, that sounds really good. And so the social worker said, okay, we need to call the psychologist for the hospital, because he's the only one that can truly admit her. We don't have the power to admit her. And I said, that's fine. Do whatever you have to do. And so they called him. Well, by the time he could get there, it's like 2 a.m. And so now she's been sleeping. So sleeping kind of reset, her brain, whatever was going on. And so at 2 a.m, he comes, he's mad because they drug him out of bed. So he's not fun to deal with. And so he comes in the room and he kicks me out of the room because, again, she's over 14. And he says, you need to go out in the waiting room and I'll be with you shortly. And I said, well, she's sleeping. You're going to have to wake her up. Okay. So I go out and I sit and I wait. But in my mind, I'm still thinking he's going to sign her up and she's going to go into the mental health ward and get evaluated. We're going to fix it. That's how my brain was working at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so about 10 minutes later, he comes out and he says, okay, well, she's getting dressed. She's getting her shoes on. She'll be out in a minute to go home. And I said, but I'm not taking her home. And he said, well, I'm not keeping her. And so I start going through again, what's been going on all night, right? Up till this point. And he said, boy, she's good. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, obviously she made this episode all up for attention. And, if I were you, I would let her therapist know what happened so that she knows. And I said, okay, but I don't want to take her home. And he said, again, you have to take her home. We're not keeping. I said, well, then what do I do with her? I said, I have this child who emotionally is out of control. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, whatever. And he said, well, it could be a borderline personality disorder. It could be, we have people that come in the ER every week because they ran out of meds, and then we give them meds and then they go and then they come back when they run out of meds again. And I said, okay, but I don't want to function like that. I don't want my child to function like that. What is happening? He says, well, if I were, my, her dad and I were not married at the time. And so he says, well, I think I'd tell you, you and share with your ex-husband that I would just watch your backs because, I don't know what she's capable of doing. Have a nice evening. And they weren't going to keep her. I had to leave with her and, took her home. But I was, angry, I don't think is really an adequate word to explain it. But I was angry.
You weren't angry at her. You were angry at them.
I was angry at the system, and I was angry at him, and I was and no, I wasn't angry at her. But at that point, I'm like out fledgling in the world, right? I have this teenager that I have no idea what she's capable of doing. And what do I do? And so, she was supposed to go to her therapist the next week. She conveniently didn't show up. And then, 2 weeks later, she took her own life. And so, and like I said, it was just a perfect storm. Had they kept her, at the hospital for a period of time, things may have gone different. I can't say that they would because I have no idea if that's the case. But it's a good example of how our system, isn't functioning correctly at all.
It's failed so many people.
It has, and it's
sad.
tragic.
That's sad. I'm sorry to hear that. It just blows my mind to hear, a physician that would say something like that, and then for him to say that she made up this story for attention. Did you find that to be true?
Well, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not sure. What I do
know,
but
as a mother, you know her well enough that would she?
I wasn't with her when she started this episode that she ended up going to the hospital with. She was with her brother, and her brother called me and said that she had passed out in the front yard they were at their grandmother's house. And so she had passed out in the yard and he didn't know what to do. And so I said, well, you call 911, you get an ambulance there and you find out. So the speculation was that she had this anxiety attack, that she was all upset because, they were teenagers. They fought all the time anyway. And so he probably said something to upset her. Anyway, he claimed that she'd had this anxiety attack and then passed out. So, the aid car comes, takes her to the hospital. I meet her at the hospital. So she'd probably been there like 10 minutes before I got there. So by the time I got there, she's in a gown. She's giving her urine test because so now
Blood
she's walking
test.
back down the hall
Yeah.
carrying her little urine sample with her. And, at that point I thought, well, good, because I want to know if she's on something.
Yeah.
And again, she wasn't. So I'm still going on this. Oh, she had this anxiety attack and she just overwhelmed and passed out. So the psychologist said, well, that's not even biologically possible that you can have an anxiety attack and pass out from that. So what caused her to be unconscious in the yard? I don't know. I wasn't there to say she's pretending. I have no idea biologically what was happening with her. I just know that this psychologist, based off what I said to him, and I would assume whatever they wrote in her chart by the time he got there, led him to believe, oh, okay, she must have been making up the whole thing. So it was very strange, but in the end, she still had a mental health issue that wasn't dealt with appropriately, and took her own life because she thought that was her final option to resolve whatever was going on in her head.
Yeah, but she was somehow, no matter what it was, she was still finding a way to seek help.
Yes.
Whether she was doing or making something up for attention, as someone was saying, no matter what she was doing or what she was saying, she was still finding a way to try to seek help. And the system still failed her no matter what.
Yes.
So that's what I'm saying, that how much the system really needs to be re-educated, and have total understanding, because something was causing her to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something. And the other part of it is, and I was guilty of it. Like I said, when she first started having these issues, I'm calling the local mental health professionals. I'm like, okay, here you go, fix my baby.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're geared toward, or trained, I guess is a good word. That's the first thing we do is we find our mental health professionals. But it's more than just that. We can help each other, right? Yeah. We can support each other. We're calling it upward prevention, because when I said that there's layers of things that happen with people, and it's finally that last straw that's the final one. It could be as easy as saying someone's stressed out because they lost their job, then they lost their housing, then they lost their car, then they start, and then eventually something fatal, they make a fatal choice. Well, what if we're helping?
They were going through some type of grief.
Right. And so why don't we help them down at this first level?
Yes.
Where they lost their house, or they lost their job, or COVID, when people were losing businesses.
Yes.
And then they're now living in their cars because they lost their housing, but we don't call the mental health professionals when somebody loses their job, right? We rally around our friends. We rally around the people we know that are suffering, and we help them. So I think, we need to kind of have a mindset shift.
Yes.
That, don't assume that that somebody is not struggling, because they're, you see them every day and they're smiling and they're happy.
They're hiding
because we are very good at putting up a mask.
Yes.
Of what we're going through.
So. Oh, yes. Oh, now you see, that is so funny. I now sort of remember I wrote a story or wrote a book. I can't remember what it was, but I never published it, and it was called Unmask something. Now that you said that, that just came back to me, and I wish I knew what I did with the document, the script or whatever, because I remember it was really good. Even if I made up the story, it was still really good. And I think it was something. I did a lot of writing in my teen years because I went through a lot of my depression in my teen years. My mother had been killed. Back in the 70s, they did not really give us grief support,
No.
So we sort of had to use other methods to help ourselves. And writing was my thing. I loved writing stories. I don't know why. I can't do it now like I did as a teen. But now you said that when you use that term, unmask, a stunning boom. Hey, what happened to that book you wrote that was called Unmask?
Maybe it's time to, recycle that and get it back out there.
Yes, that's funny. But yes, you see, that's the thing. I still feel like, even with this being 2023, there's still the system, whether it's medical or teachers or mental health professionals or whoever it may be, it's still like they're still stuck being in the past of not really helping people.
Mm-hmm.
And when they should have the ability to be.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, back in the 70s, we didn't have anything. Everybody worked out their own stuff.
Yeah.
I can say we are better now. We
No.
just have, some
Maybe
pockets
just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with all the technology and everything we have, we could be doing more, I think. But, again, people want to, they need to hold their stuff. They don't like to share that they're struggling, right? Pride comes into a lot of that. And then, there's just not enough help sometimes to go around for what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, we just got to keep pushing. We just have to keep putting the messaging out there that we still need help out here. One thing that's interesting, when I started my company back in 2018, my mindset was, I've been a loss survivor all this time. I'm consistently hearing other loss survivors say there's no resources. And so I thought, okay, I need to create a company that I will create resources and I will share them out to everybody that needs them. And over time now, I have come to realize that there are so many resources out there, good resources that are created nationally, internationally by really great people. The problem is not that we don't have enough resources. The problem is we're not getting them to the people that need them. So that's my new focus, is to figure out either why or how do we do that, because I don't understand it. I will still have new loss survivors come into our local support group who will say, thank goodness we found you, because we had no idea where to find support and nobody told us. Well, why? Why is this still going on 16 years after I've lost my daughter, that people don't know where to find the resources they need? I mean, it makes no sense to me. The local coalition that I belong to, they were trying to assess, what do we do, in the new year? Do we need to make new resources? And I said, no, we don't need to make new resources. I said, I can probably find you an unlimited amount of resources nationwide you can bring here. I said, you need to put like a bulletin up on the reader board, when you're driving down the freeway, the bulletin board, when you're driving down the freeway. I said, we need like a big poster that says, loss survivors, here's where to find stuff, or suicide prevention messaging or something right there where everybody driving by it every day can see it. Because, we have the stigma that we don't talk about suicide. Therefore, we don't share the resources that are out there either. And that has to change.
So in a sense, so now I'm hearing what you're saying, that we don't have. So it's a matter of finding sponsors who is willing to pay for that to be up on those boards,
Yes.
Because now, don't they have a new number for mental health?
988. Mm-hmm.
988. So you'd be surprised how many people out there that may not know about 988.
They may not know about 988, and they may not know the true purpose of 988. Yes. So before we had 988, we had the suicide hotline. And that was the number that you called if you were in a suicide crisis, or you had somebody with you that was in a suicide crisis and you needed some help. With what 988 has done is it has taken that, and then it has propelled it further to say you don't have to be in a suicidal crisis. You just have to have some mental health problem that you think you have. So, and it's for us, it's for kids. If you have a child that is being bullied at school and they're sad and they don't know what to do, they can call 988. If you have the person that's losing their housing and they're stressed out and they don't know what to do and they need somebody to talk them down, they can call 988. So 988 is so much more of a vast resource for people to talk it out.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, we're going to need more people to get trained to be at crisis centers to help field the 988 calls that come in. So we've seen a lot of federal funding, a lot of state funding. Like I said, in another month, I'm going to be at the conference. We'll have SAMHSA there to talk all about what's new with 988 since last year when they rolled it out. So I'm excited to hear about that. So maybe we'll have to do another podcast episode so you can hear what 988 is doing. But yeah, 988 is such a valid resource. And people say, well, and there's so much mixed messaging, negative messaging out there that's just not true. I've heard people say, oh, I'm not going to call 988 because the cops are going to come and they're going to haul me away and lock me up. And that's not what 988 is designed for. 988 is designed for getting on the phone with somebody with mental health credentials to talk about what's going on with them at that moment. If there is a real crisis, they can have that further conversation. But it is not an automatic, you call and they're coming to get you situation. It doesn't work that way.
Thankfully, it's more like to just talk. Just
right.
Talk it. That's a resource. Like I was saying, you just need an outlet. Just talk. If somebody is willing to sit there and listen to you, listen with love and cares about what's going to happen to you, then that's your outlet. That's your resource. Talk it out. But if they find that you may need deeper help, then they will make this, discuss it with you and say, okay, do you feel you need to go to the hospital or something like that to get some help?
Well, and kids today, they don't like to talk, right? They don't want to.
Yes, especially men and boys.
So you can text. You can text with 988. You don't have to have a verbal conversation. So, they'll be texting back and forth all the time.
Yes, I heard about that you can text them as well.
Yep.
That is
we're making
awesome.
progress. We really are. It's just doesn't seem to happen fast enough.
Right. No. And you would think with this being 2023, it would be, and it's not,
Yeah. We need more people talking about it. We need more people talking about it on media. We need, the influencers out there, be it celebrities, be it people that are just influencers on TikTok, Twitter, whatever social media platform. We need more people that aren't afraid to say, hey, suicide's a problem. Mental health is something that you shouldn't be ashamed of. And we need to get the helpers in there that can help people get through their crisis, whatever that is at that moment.
Yeah. I got my certification as a mental health coach last summer. And I tell you, the training was so intense. I thought I was majoring in psychology because a lot of the classes they were teaching people to be psychologists. So, and there was like substance abuse, suicide. There was like all kind of, it was like an 8-week or 10-week, 12-week class that I got done in a week. And I tell you, that was my biggest mistake because it really hit my core before I can help anybody else.
Yeah.
And a lot of, I'm not saying this to scare anybody or anything like that, but it just from my experience and that training, that's how intense it is. That's how they want us to be really trained to understand, to know how to listen, how to help people. It put a lot of guilt on me of what I felt that I was guilty of my son.
Okay.
That I should have been a better mother. And it just like, wow, all that stuff came back. And I began to understand why it is so important to have a therapist, but why it's so important to have an effective therapist
Mm-hmm.
that's willing to listen and help, you know.
Yep.
Um,
And, and I have people that will challenge me about why would I go to a coach and instead of a therapist? First of all, I say there's room for all of us. I
yeah.
also say that, if you have someone who is in trauma, who maybe witnessed that death happen, like a self-inflicted gunshot or something like that, that person's going to need some in-depth psychological trauma reducing help. If you have a parent who, is 5 to 10 years out from that loss, and it's just a matter of how do I get out of bed? I'm still not getting out of bed. I'm still not getting to work, that kind of thing. And they need to talk it out. Coaching is great for that. What I found when I got my master's degree through the in the coaching classes specifically, coaching seems to get kind of a bum rap, right? We get coaches because we want to lose weight, or we get coaches because, we want to perform better at work, or
Motivate.
something like that. And then, you
Yeah.
get coaches that want to charge $10,000 to do that. And so coaching has kind of got this, like I said, bum rap of not really being effective for anything that might be considered clinical or medical or anything like that. And so what I learned, in my classes was coaching actually came out of the positive psychology training. And so its history and foundation is within positive psychology.
Yes.
So, we've gone through these psychology classes to learn how to effectively understand people and understand trauma. And of course, there's always more room to learn, right? We still have continuing education that has to keep happening. But, don't cut coaches short, because, that can really be an effective way to treat people when they're trying to overcome grief, loss, understanding their role in, their perceived role in that loss. So yeah, kudos to you for doing your part of coaching also.
Also, what I was told by I think it was one of the psychologists from that training that I was getting, that was saying that coaching is really about today, now, and tomorrow and forward. Therapy is about yesterday and the past. So on any underlying issues, you would go to therapy, because that's what they're meant to help you from your past. But coaches is to help motivate you, to uplift you, to encourage you, to be whatever you can be today and forward.
But I also think that we can't, as coaches, we can't go totally with the present and future. We're doing a disservice to our client if we don't acknowledge that they had past situations.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Oh, yes.
And so, because I will talk to coaches that'll be like, I can't talk about what happened with my client, 2 years ago. Well, your client needs to know that you understand that this happened to them 2 years ago. And yes, then we talk about, well, how's that affecting you today? And then, how do you see yourself functioning, in the future? But I don't think we can totally ignore the past situation, especially when you get to grief and suicide and all of that.
Yes,
because what's happening with them right now is directly tied to what happened.
Yes, because there are a lot of things that may be an underlying issue that only a therapist can really help you with that,
Right. Yeah.
And then it's not our job as coaches to to give them the advice. We can only bring up suggestions, and we can also refer them if we felt like with agreement with them that maybe they need somebody with something a little bit deeper from the past, and then come back for what you want to do today and move forward, so that we can motivate you and encourage you, because that's what people need most. And that's one thing I really enjoy doing, is motivating people. I love encouraging people. And people, I don't know if you ever heard of Dr. Norman Wright. He's a psychologist that taught in California, University of California. But he lost his son, but he also lost his wife. And he wrote many, many books, and he taught many, many years on grief. And one of his books that I love, oh my God, my mind just went blank what the name of it is. But it was almost like a daily motivation, like a daily. Yeah. And one of the things I learned, grief is the 7-letter word for encouragement.
Okay.
We all go through grief, but when we comfort, I'm sorry, not grief, comfort. Comfort is the 7-letter word for encouragement, because the whole idea of comforting people is really to encourage them, to uplift them, not.
Well, as
We
you
have to
know,
be
I
careful
mean,
what we say, and we have to be careful what we do, though, because you don't want to what word I want to use?
undermine.
I want to use the word undermine. That came to my mind too. You don't want to put more pressure or add more grief to the grievers,
Right.
And I do teach a class how to become an effective comforter, because a lot of times we say and do with good intentions, though, things that are inappropriate at the time of a loss, So it's one of the greatest things I learned from one of his books was what to say and what to do, or what not to say. Excellent book. And it's the workbook that I use was his workbook from that. The best thing to help somebody who's grieving, no matter what type of grief it is just present.
Yes.
And listen. Even if you don't know what to say or do, just be present. And that can be the greatest encouragement that the griever can have, that you're willing to be there and listen to them, even if you don't know what to say or what to do.
Right.
Hold their hands, comfort them, hug them, put your arms
Sit
around
with
them.
And listen. Yep.
Yep. There was a story that he told in there that was really good. And I think it's really, really good for even if we're going to be helping people who are suicide ideation. Although that's not what this story was about, but I think it's a good story to use. There was this guy that lost his wife, and he was going through the grief, and the pastor came to visit him, and they both sat on the same sofa except at different ends, and the pastor didn't say anything, and the spouse didn't say anything, and they just sat there like for an hour, not saying a single thing to each other. And then finally the pastor says, "Are you hungry for pizza?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And then they began that conversation, but they began a conversation that was more to encourage him, to uplift him, because the pastor understood his grief. Right. And I think the spouse understood what the pastor might have been going through as well. So they became that support system, and the griever was able to have someone to.
Right.
I hate this when you hate this age in your mind. You know what word you want to use and you can't get it out. But he had that.
I thought I was the only one that did that. So thank you.
But he had that resource, that the pastor. But the pastor also can give him other resources, the support groups and stuff like that. So, but it started just being present.
Yes.
And waiting for the griever to bring the conversation open. Because they may have so much thing goes in their head, we've had our losses. We have all these things running through our head, and it's just like, that grief sort of fogs your brain.
It does, yeah.
But you need that moment to just sit and calm
and just
down.
Decompress a little bit, yeah. I have a colleague named Jen Marr, and she wrote a book called Inspiring Comfort. And I highly recommend you find that book because it's amazing. She, and before she started that company, she was part of a group that went down to the school down in Florida where all the little kids had the mass shooting. And so her team went in there for 5 years to just help these students come back into the school setting and, progress each school year. And so she had to learn a lot about just comforting and sitting and just being there and being supportive. And now she's built a company out of that concept. So Inspire and Comfort, definitely check it out. Because it's so important that we just need to be there for people, and I combat this a lot where people be like, well, I'm not going to talk to this loss survivor or this person in grief because I don't know what to say. It's like, you don't need to know what to say. As a loss survivor, I would rather you tell me, I don't know what to say to you. I don't expect you to know what to say to me. I don't even know what to say to me most of the time. So, but just to know that you cared enough to sit here and tell me you don't know what to say means more than you know. So, if you're surrounded by people who are grieving, and you don't know what to say legitimately, just tell them, I don't know what to say. I don't know. I don't know what you're feeling. I don't know. I've never been through this. That's okay to say that you don't know. Because then you have the other side of it where you have people that come out and say totally inappropriate things to somebody who's grieving. And then now you have a loss survivor that's all worked up and upset because I can't believe that person told me that.
And I think also, and you probably can stand up and say this because you probably might have personally understood this. Did you also have relatives and friends blame you for her death?
Yes.
See?
Yeah.
That's where the inappropriate comes in. Mm-hmm. And that's where they didn't say the correct things. They should have just said, I'm sorry for your loss. Yeah. There should be no blame because nobody understands why she did this. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to understand that.
Yeah. I've had people that have, I particularly know of one person who works as a medical therapist, a mental health professional, who lost her son to suicide. And the day of the suicide, somebody actually said, oh, you're a therapist. Shouldn't you have seen the signs that this was coming? So that added a whole different element to her grief and extended it out a longer period of time than it probably needed to. Because, not only did it hit her at the level of a parent, as a mom, of, I already feel guilty because my child's gone. But as a professional, I was trained to look for these symptoms and my child died too. People need to think before they open their mouth. I mean, I was doing a presentation 2 days ago because locally they want to start some grief support groups for teenagers after school. And they wanted me to come in and train them on how to help grieving children. And it was fabulous because I had a room full of 20 people who really wanted to make a difference. So that was exciting, in and of itself. But they said, can you give us a list of things to say and not to say to someone, who's grieving? And, right on the list was, you can't go up to somebody that's grieving and say, they're in a better place now.
Yes.
Well,
that's another thing.
You don't know, really. I mean, coming, not talking about religious faith and all of that. I'm pretty confident where my daughter is. But when someone is in that new grief stage, don't say that. They're just they're still trying to understand why they're even gone. So don't dismiss what someone is feeling with a platitude of they're in a better place. God had a reason. Don't say any of that, even if it's true, but don't say it.
It's inappropriate. It's inappropriate at the time of the loss. But if you wanted to say it maybe months or years later, that might be different, But when at that time of that loss, our brain, especially when you lose a child, our brain is not going to be functioning the way it normally does because we're now numb to what happened and our brain is foggy from the grief. And sometimes this will last for not days, not weeks, not months, but it could last for years
or decades.
Yes. So it's unless you have really lost a child. I mean, I had a friend who said something to me today, and he said, well, you need just to get over Timothy and stop talking about him. And I said, you know what? That's the worst thing you can say to a parent who's lost a child. I said, you better be glad it's me that's sitting here next to you, because if there was another parent and they lost a child and they heard you say that, you would have been slapped for saying that, because it's totally inappropriate. You just don't say that. And the funny thing is, this man lost a son himself, but he has absolutely no emotions to it at all. He just he
probably has a lot of repressed grief.
Yeah.
He probably grew up in a culture that said we don't talk about that and we just move on.
Yep.
And
exactly.
I always say that I think people are inherently good. I don't think they get up in the morning to say, how can I hurt this loss survivor any more than they already are, right? I think that people are they need to be educated on what you say and what you don't say, and people try to help. So they come out with these statements that they think they're helping. They're not helping. I recently I've had people say, I cannot believe that somebody said that they lost their pet, therefore they understand what I went through losing my child. No, you can't say you understand how somebody feels in their grief if you have not walked that same type of grief.
And you can't, and it really shouldn't be comparing anyway.
You shouldn't be comparing anyway.
Human to human, or pet or human. But one part of me, I've heard that many times, but one thing I've always said, that person might have never had a child. Maybe the animal was like their child to them. So although we don't want to compare, we still don't want to disrespect their loss. We still need to respect that they have a loss. So in their minds, they don't understand what it's like to lose their own child, but they understand how to lose their pet. So they're still grieving. So we need to still respect their grief and just say, I'm sorry for your loss, and walk away.
And move on.
And walk away, because you don't want to get into that argument, because you had a loss, but they also had a loss. So if you want them to respect you and your loss, you need to also respect them on their loss.
Right.
Just walk away so there's no argument.
Yes.
That's all I can say, because you're going to constantly hear that. I constantly hear that. It's unbelievable. And I'm like, just walk away. Just respect their loss. I'm sorry for your loss, and walk away. Because
we lost my father-in-law a couple of years back from some heart issues. And, I will have people come up to me and say, oh, you're probably a great support for your mother-in-law because, you've gone through grief. And I say, well, I can tell my mother-in-law all these ideas of processing grief, journaling and, all of that. I said, but I'm not going to begin to understand what she's going through of losing a spouse of 55 years compared to, losing my child. In a different circumstance, they aren't equal. So, people who deal with grief, they don't just automatically know how to deal with all grief. We can learn, right? We can all learn how to do that. But there's a lot of assumptions, I think, that that happen in our society that shouldn't happen.
But also, one of the things that I was grateful to have learned, that I've shared many times, we all have losses, and although we all grieve differently for our losses, but I understand your loss, but I do not understand your pain, because you had a relationship with your daughter that I did not have with my son. My relationship with my son was totally different. So there's no way you can understand why my pain is the way it is. We have two different personalities, two different, types of things that were going on in our lives. So I can understand your loss, but I do not understand your pain, because your pain is your pain. Your grief is your grief. Your loss is your loss.
That's a great way to frame that.
Only you will always understand what you have gone through with your daughter. Just like with me, only I would, with his father, who's been out of the freaking picture, thank God. my relationship with my son was totally different than what his father's relationship was,
Right. Yep.
Totally different. His father, the day Timothy died, he was more worried about the child support than he was with the fact that his son had just died. So that's where his mentality was. Where can I get this money back? And the child support office was like, no.
Wow.
They even wanted him to pay one more month.
Wow.
And he's like in a rush. When can I get the death certificate? Honey, even I didn't get the death certificate yet. So what makes you think you're going to get it right away? And I says, by the way, I already made, already paid for it. So I'm going to send you one anyway. So he goes online and he goes and buys his own. Kind of find out he had life insurance on Timothy.
Wow.
And he wanted that
and he
money.
had to prove it. He had to prove
But
well, we could do a whole other show on ex-husbands and how they, operated in this situation.
Yeah. And like, how can you not have, and he wanted to talk about it right away. And I said, Victor, listen to me. We just lost our son. The last thing I want to talk about is business, the child support or whatever it is. Right now, I'm grieving for the loss of Timothy and we're working on his funeral. That's where my focus is. That's what your focus should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like,
it gets back to that part of everybody's different, right?
Yeah. And men, especially men, they really grieve differently. So I do not know whether he really ever grieved for Timothy. I have to assume that maybe he did, but the way his perfect surroundings, because as soon as he heard that Timothy had the muscular dystrophy, all of a sudden Timothy was out of his circle, his perfect circle.
Right.
Because everything had to be perfect. And I kept saying, Victor, you have to remember something. He was a Christian. I said, Jesus came and died on the cross for our imperfections. If you want to be perfect, wait till you get to heaven, because that would never happen here on earth.
Right. No matter how hard you try. Yeah.
Did you know how men, excuse me, I'm sorry, I know all men are not like this, but his mentality was, and it's sad because, Timothy was maybe your daughter was too, but he was a very smart kid, very smart, graduated with honors, was going to University of Florida, in spite that his body and his lungs were not cooperating well, Yeah. But he had the smartness, I hate to say this, but Victor was smart. He was a very smart guy. So he had Victor's smartness, But Timothy also was very smart and understood behaviors. And he didn't like his dad's behavior.
I get it. I get it. My daughter wasn't totally a fan of her dad either, but
Yeah, that's sad.
Chelsea was very smart. Chelsea was very crafty, very she liked to do fashion and she liked to draw and she liked to she's very artistic.
Wow.
But she was pretty, I like to say she was street smart. She struggled academically. But she was cute enough that she would sway people to her side. I tell the story that in her math class, she was a junior in high school. And so she would go to math class and she would get her makeup and she would strew her makeup all over her desk. And then all of her girlfriends would all kind of circle around there and she'd be doing makeup lessons
during math class.
During math class. And the teacher, and I didn't know this. I mean, this was stuff that came out at her memorial service because the teachers came. And so he told me, he said, yeah, she was always doing these math or these makeup techniques in the back of my classroom. And he'd say, you need to, hey, we're in the middle of class. Could you put all of that away? Because I'm up here talking. And she would be totally clueless that this was a problem. She'd be, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'll get that put away right now. I didn't realize. You go to math class every day. This is what we do, right? But no, she'd just be, oh, no, we're going to do, eyeliner today and talk about that. And she was so cute that these teachers couldn't get mad at her.
Sound like she could have been a good businesswoman too.
Politician, maybe. I don't know.
So
Possibly.
she was good at political too?
Well, she was, she could talk herself out of circles and she could talk herself, in and out of situations. So I'm sure there would have been a use for that somewhere in her life. But yeah, I mean, she was vibrant. She was a force, I was thinking back to the top of the podcast here when you asked me about things I'd learned. And as you know, as parents, we struggle with guilt when we lose the child. And with suicide, we have the guilt that, again, we should have seen this coming and we should have seen these behaviors and whatever. And so after we lose the children, I have many parents that say, I feel guilty because I should have known that they were going to do this. And I didn't stop it from happening. And I heard this and I struggled with that too. And about 5 years into the loss, I heard this really great analogy where someone said, well, do you have grandparents? Well, yeah. Do you have parents? Well, yeah, or your grandparents, are they still alive? Well, chronologically, you've probably lost them by now, right? So, well, yeah, I had grandparents, but they passed away. Okay. Do you still talk about them? Do you still say I had grandma and grandpa? And well, yeah. Well, then you should be able to say, well, I had this child, because you have so many people that say, I don't talk about my child. If somebody says, how many kids do I have? Sometimes they just don't include that in the number, that child. It's like, you need to include them because they were family, just like your grandparents were, just like your parents were. But the other thing I say is, as teenagers, we did stuff that our parents never knew about or probably don't know about to this day, right? So, did you get up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to go to school and then I'm going to skip fourth period, and then I'm going to go to the mall, and then, I'll be home after school. You won't know I didn't go to class. No, we don't share those things we're going to get in trouble for, right? So, I say, well, your child didn't get up in the morning and say, well, I'm going to do this, and then after school, I'm going to go out and I'm going to end my life. No, they're not going to share that with you. So therefore, how would you know that this was going to happen? You don't. Yes, if you see signs along the way, yeah, you probably jump on that and try to do something about it. But, when a person decides to take their own life, most of the time they're not going to, get up in the morning and share that with you like the daily events that are going to happen that day. And as I've said that to different parents along the way, they're like, well, thank you. Thank you for kind of putting the perspective on that this isn't something that we could have known, should have known. Because, any of our acquaintances on any given day, we don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what they're going to do, not do, what they're going to tell us. So just because it's suicide related, what makes that different? It's really not. So I wanted to get that out there before we ended, that
that's a really good
we need to be a little softer on ourselves in this grief process, that we aren't expected to be everywhere all the time, know everything all the time, and expect that we're told everything that we need to know, because it just it's humanly impossible.
Yes, that's true. And I think my guilt is because from the time, well, actually it probably started before then, but once Timothy was diagnosed with the muscular dystrophy, it's like all of a sudden my brain switched, and that depression and anxiety and everything came flowing in. And there were a lot of times I was in the hospital too. And that's where my guilt was, is being in the hospital and not being there for Timothy. When I felt like I should have been there for him. So that's where my guilt is. Well,
Well, I think as
Tracy,
parents, I think as parents, we're kind of geared toward, we're kind of told this is your responsibility to get this child to adulthood, right? And so we kind of have that ingrained into us, and sometimes it's skewed a little bit from that.
yeah. Well, Tracy, I'm so thankful that you have been here and to talk about this. Yes, I think this is a conversation we do need to have. I'm thinking about having a boot camp this fall, and
That'd be great.
that would be great to have these different discussions because it is so much needed.
Yes, it
Not
is.
just with the patient themselves, but the family and then the community as well. So
Right.
tell us where we can find you.
So I seem to be all over the place, but you can um, you can primarily find me through my website. So journeythroughgrief.com, and that's THRU for through. You can email me, Tracy O at journeythroughgrief.com. I'm on LinkedIn. We have a podcast, Journey Through Your Suicide Loss. That's available on, all the podcast platforms. Facebook. I have a page on Facebook, or a profile on Facebook. Journey Through Grief also has a page on Facebook. So, come check out my social media, send me an email. If anybody needs any help with loss, or needs me to come and educate people on loss, I'm more than happy to do that.
So here's a perfect example of a resource that you can go to Tracy, and I'm sure her website or whatever will probably have a lot more resources that can help people, for parents and siblings who also have had the loss of their brother or sister, or that's another discussion I would like to have with you, because last week we did do a workshop on when children grieve, or how to help children grieve, and that is a conversation that we should have too, because I'm sure the siblings are going through that grief as well.
And
That
children tend to grieve differently than adults do. So that's,
Yep,
a whole different aspect.
yep.
And
So
if you go on my website and you don't find something you need, like I said, just drop
ask.
a inquiry through there and I'll find it,
Yeah,
whatever it is that you need.
yeah. Well, thank you for being here and for educating us and helping us and being a supportive of understanding this type of loss. Um, I know there have been a couple of other people I've had on podcasts where they lost their spouse. So I see it in the facial of that pain, and it's just you want to be there for them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I thank you for being part of our podcast tonight, and I would love to rebook you and bring you back in, because you have so much that you can share with us that we can probably do again. Maybe
Anytime.
this summer or this fall when you're
Yeah.
not so busy, since you're all over the place.
This is important. This is important stuff. So
Yeah, it is
thank
really
you for the
important.
opportunity, and thank you for having me on. And I'll come back anytime you need me.
Yeah, it'd be great. You really you inspired me. So thank you.
Oh, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. You inspired me, and it'd be wonderful to have you come back on. So this is Dee Bird with Unplug Grief Ministries Podcast. We have been here with Tracy. Pronounce your last name.
Oeser.
Oh, so that's what I thought. I didn't want to say it wrong. We're going to invite her to come back and have another conversation about, the suicide loss, and she'll probably have a lot more to teach us and educate us more about it. But tonight was fabulous, and I thank you for being here. I thank you, Tracy. I look forward to having you back. Are you going to be part of our Global Grief Conference?
I'm in there. I've been looking at different stuff. So, I'm glad you guys are putting that together.
Yep.
Everybody needs to get in there.
Yeah, it's our second annual virtual Global Grief Conference at the end of April. And it's going to be an exciting thing. I hope you are able to come on, because that would be a wonderful workshop or seminar to have there with you on this. So thank you again for being here. Thank you, everybody who has joined us tonight to hear this. Thankfully, this has been I hope this has been recorded so we can replay it for everybody. Have a wonderful evening. I'm going to go make my spaghetti. So have a good night.